I'm here today and I'm about to ask her if she knows who Karl Marx is.
I don't know.
She doesn't know. One of 9 children, and he was born to Frederick and Henrietta Marx, May 5th, 1818, in Persia. In 1835, he attended the University of Berlin, where he studied philosophy, and he ended up getting his doctorate degree in 1841. In 1842, he moved and he met and befriended Ludwig Feuerbach, who's also a known humanist, and he actually had a lot of influence on Karl and where he actually wanted to take that philosophy degree. In 1843, he married his wife / his best friend, so it's typical Romeo and Juliet love story, and her name was Jenny von Westphalen. They then moved to Paris, and he wrote his first critique on the philosophy of rights. Later on, in 1845, he actually paired up with philosopher Friedrich Engels, and the two actually then wrote a battle cry for permanent revolution in society. 1869, Marx then takes everything into his own hands, and he writes a contribution to the critique of political economy. In 1875, he writes his last critique, and it states, "For each according to his ability is each according to his need." Unfortunately, he later passed away in 1883 from bronchitis. So that's just a quick, brief insight for you. Hopefully you gain some more knowledge from the rest of our video, and hopefully you enjoy it.
A theory based on the ideas of the philosopher Karl Marx. Marx was born in Germany in 1818 and died in London in 1883. He's buried in Highgate Cemetery in North London. Marxism is what is known as a conflict theory because it states that society is in conflict with each other, and Marxism claims that this conflict is between the rich and the poor. Now, Marxism, as we understand it as sociologists, is a political and economic philosophy, a view of the way things are now, and suggestions as to where society is headed. The danger is that we start to view it based on what we understand about its relationship to communism and the politics and oppression of the old Soviet Union. Marx never saw communism in this way. He saw it as liberation and as a leveller, a way of creating a fairer society, and of a way of getting the best out of all people, not just those with money and power. To really understand Marxism, we need to start with its opposite, capitalism. Capitalism represents the type of society you and I live in today. In Marx's terms, it's an economic system based on private ownership of the means of production. What this means is that our society today is based on a few people who own factories, businesses, shops, and other corporations. These corporations aren't owned by the people who work for them, the employees, or jointly by the employees and the owners, but by the owners only. Marx was formulating his theories during the Industrial Revolution, a time when Britain and other countries were going through a very dramatic change. The old feudal system, when lords of the manor owned the land, meant that the ordinary people had freedom and rights to all land. It was held in common. When the government passed a number of enclosure acts in the 1700s and 1800s, ordinary people no longer had the right to live on this land, and many of them were forced to pack up and move to the towns and the cities, which were beginning to grow due to the increase in factories and textile mills. Whereas previously people were free to keep their own animals and grow their own crops on common land, once they reached the cities they had to find work in the factories, in the employment of the factory owners. The work was hard and often dangerous, and the pay was very poor. Many factory owners didn't want to pay high wages because this would mean less profit for them, so children were often used as cheap labour. The Industrial Revolution promoted a capitalist way of thinking, what we call a capitalist ideology, and also created two distinct groups of people. The factory owners, who were middle class, Marx called these the bourgeoisie, and the workers, or working class, Marx called these the proletariat. Marx was on the side of the proletariat because he saw them as being treated unfairly by the factory owners. Not only did Marx see them as being treated unfairly or being oppressed, he also saw the system as one that tried very hard to make sure that the poor stayed poor and the rich continued to get richer. So Marxism views capitalist society as being based on a system that encourages inequality, because the rich will always need someone to do the work they don't want to do. It's called a conflict theory because society is in conflict, the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie. However, Marx also suggested that at some point the working class would realise that they had the power to change things. Through education and personal development, some members of the proletariat would begin to understand the system better and devise ways of changing it. Marx believed that such radical change could only come about through revolution, when the workers rise up and overthrow those who were treating them unfairly. In place of capitalism, a new system would be established in which all people were treated equally and all the factories and businesses were owned by everyone. In other words, they were communally owned. Marx called this system communism.
Marx believed that work, at its best, is what makes us human. It fulfills our species' essence, as he put it. Work allows us to live, to be creative, to flourish. However, the reality in 19th century Europe was that work destroyed workers, particularly those who had nothing to sell but their labour. To the mill and factory owners, a worker was simply an abstract idea with a stomach that needed to be filled. The workers had no choice but to toil long hours for a pitiful wage. What was worse, their labour alienated them. Alienation is a disorienting sense of exclusion and separation. Factory labour, under capitalism, alienated the workers from the product of their labour. They made stuff they couldn't afford to buy, which disappeared to shops in far-off places, to make money for people who paid them next to nothing. The factory production line split jobs into meaningless tasks that made the hours at work tedious, empty and bleak. They became cogs in a gigantic machine. Workers lived for the few hours at home when they could eat, sleep and relax. The rest of the time, they weren't fully alive. This work also alienated them from each other. The only way out of this drudgery, Marx argued, was for the workers to organize and revolt. They needed to seize the means of production, leading to his famous rallying cry, "Workers of the world, unite! You have nothing to lose but your chains."
Although Karl Marx's theory on Marxism brings a lot of controversial discussion, we as a group feel that yes, his contributions are still relevant today. Let us explain. Although many will disagree on why we feel that his contributions are still relevant, we feel this way because everything he has proclaimed would happen over 125 years ago is slowly but surely coming to life, and is no longer a depiction of his thought. He said that eventually modern work would become so overly specialized there would no longer be enough work to go around, and this is exactly what is happening. Look around, everywhere we go, almost everything is computerized.
There are more robots than humans in workplaces, such as factories, which leaves less work for us. He also said that capitalists would continue to gain fortune and power from people who are considered to be underneath them. Now, this really gains our attention. A lot of people do not notice what is going on around them. We are such a fast-moving world that we don't really stop and consider what is actually occurring. Companies such as Nike, Adidas, and other major corporations get rich and stay rich by underpaying their workers, and the sad part is they get away with it. A corporation such as Nike pays their workers $3.50 for the day, which for the week adds up to $21. $21 for a multi-million dollar company. They do not have benefits, a union, or holidays, sick days, or pregnancy leave. But because it is not directly happening to us, we fail to realize the importance. Karl Marx pointed out the truth, and the people who say otherwise are probably capitalists themselves. We as a group feel like he deserves a recognition for his work, and hopefully one day the necessary steps will be taken to once and for all put all the negative aspects that come with capitalism to rest.